Hey everybody, welcome back. The good news is today's talk is Talk the Talk, Communicating Business Risk During Cyber Incidents. All incidents are incidents including the fire drill that we just had. I pulled that as part of this, mostly because I wanted to have the least number of people in here to hear what I'm talking about. So welcome back. My name is Alex Nette. I am the CEO and co-founder of a cybersecurity services firm based out of Richmond here. And ultimately, from my side, a little bit on my background, worked across a number of different spaces, both in the public and private sectors. I've also worked through a lot of different disciplines within cybersecurity. I started out originally in information insurance, got way down in the nitty-gritty and vulnerability management and AppSec, and came back up eventually to overall strategy. It took me through a series of incident response roles, both building programs and participating in those incident response functions across multiple Fortune 500 companies. A big part of today's talk, though, is talking about incident response. So picture this, it's a quiet Friday afternoon, or in this case, maybe a Thursday afternoon. You've just gotten back from a fire drill. You have all of the food that you need. And, oh no, hackers in the mainframe. Everything falls apart. You've just been kicking it with your friends. You've been talking about the latest controls you want to implement or talking about SSDLC, trying to figure out how to make your program better. And everything gets turned on its head. And it kind of ruins your day. The biggest thing, though, of course, is you say, cool, no problem. We have an incident response plan. Let's roll this out. How many of you guys participate currently in the incident response function at your company? Trick question. You all should have raised your hand, right? Everybody has a role. But there are some of you who are experts in this, so I'm not going to dive into cybersecurity incident response. At a high level, though, it basically looks like this: preparation, getting ready for an incident. And this comes from NIST Incident Response Framework. You eventually want to move into detection analysis. You have to be able to detect an incident in order to respond to it. Can't detect it, can't respond. That moves to containment, eradication, and recovery. How are you actually going to handle getting rid of that problem and recovering from it? That middle part, though, is cyclical. As you find out new information, you have to move to contain it. And it's over and over until eventually you get some level of confidence that you're done with the incident. Finally, post-incident activity. How do we prevent this from happening again? Which, of course, takes you all the way back to the beginning. So here from the budget version of Inception called Tenet, we all believe we'd run into a burning building, but until we feel the heat, we can never know. You do. How many of you felt a little bit confused when Jake came up here and said, there's a fire? I honestly thought he was kidding, right? He's coming up here and saying, there's a fire, you need to get out of the building. There's a little bit of confusion. Where do we go? Who do we talk to? Where is the fire? Am I smelling smoke, right? You're having all these reactions, and you're panicking. This is the biggest thing that we talk about with incident response, is that panic is such a hard thing to overcome. And we're going to talk a lot about repetition here with understanding and getting comfortable in that space. That's the first thing you have to be in it as an incident responder, or really just in a company, and functioning in that function of incident response, living in the uncomfortable, not knowing all of the information. Think about when you see some shocking news on TV, you want more information, you want to make sense of it. You turn to conspiracy theories or whatever other dark web areas you're going to spin into, or deep depths of Twitter, to try to find out answers. That's what we do as humans. You have to be okay with not jumping to conclusions. Ultimately, you have to have the right people, the processes, and the technology to be able to get those answers. We talked about that detection and finding all the information that you need to be able to respond to an incident. Eventually, though, if it was just you and your cybersecurity IT colleagues, you could probably take all day, right? You could spin through the logs and pull all the information and get everything back up and recover from backups. The problem is, it's not just you. There's a whole company outside of you. You are just part of it. And that's a hard pill to swallow. Let's talk business. When we think about the relationship between business and IT, I want to level set on this real quick. Here's a good example. In the olden days, we had hospital beds, and we had paper on the end of the bed, right? That's the chart for the patient. It tracks medication, vitals, other prescriptions, recommendations from the doctor. But eventually we realized if we put it on a computer, you could access multiple patients from one place. Made it faster to pull up and store that information. Eventually we moved to much bigger computers, the cloud, to be able to manage that across the world and pull out much bigger health outcomes, AI and everything else feeding that. That's what IT is. There's a perception problem, though. When we think about IT, we think about companies used to be doing business by paper. We think about taking it to electronic methods for convenience, speed, and efficiency. And we think about cybersecurity. How can we secure that electronic information the exact same way we used to secure paper? That's awesome. The problem is your organization is thinking about it very different. We do IT because everyone else is doing it. They said I need a dark web-powered blockchain, AI, whatever, to make all this work. Cybersecurity is not a value-added organization. How many of you heard that one? And there's a bunch of jargon and other stuff that organizations talk about. That's a huge divide, and this is what we're going to talk about today, is how to bridge that gap. You need to step into someone else's shoes. Ha ha, business! Look at this guy. He's having a great time. Is that what you think of when you think of your business leaders? Hopefully, because that's probably about a good summation of who they are. The problem with business leaders is that they're wearing a lot of hats. And here's my boy from Caps for Sale, an old children's book, if you know it. But look at all these roles that we have that are coming out here. There's all kinds of stuff that business leaders have to worry about. And it's not always just independent. If you work at a smaller company, there's probably some of your leadership that are wearing multiple hats right now. There's not always a direct hiring manager or marketing trends manager or payroll or IT or insurances. There might be somebody wearing multiple pieces of this puzzle. And you have to know that as a cybersecurity person. A lot of these people have skills that you don't have, and that's okay. That's why we're dividing and conquering, and we're building part of a business. The larger your company, the more people might fit in these individual buckets, and again, there might be people that are wearing multiple hats. What does it boil down to? CIA triad, boring, not going to talk about it, but business leaders don't care. Boring. The only thing they care about is reputation of the company. How do we make sales? How do we keep this going? How do we make this company work? Because if the company doesn't work, we as cybersecurity professionals are out of jobs. Reputation, the umami of cybersecurity. So back to Friday afternoon. There you are, robot, hanging out. You're getting inquiries. Coworkers, hey, is something going on with our product? What's up? A little G-chat. Help desk, we're getting reports that users can't access the product. Coming from business leaders, why am I hearing the product is down? Are we in violation of our SLAs, or are our customers going to sue us? Do I need to fire up our lawyers? And vendors, hey, all our integrations aren't working. What's going on? All of those things boil down to a big core idea here, and ultimately you come back and you probably say something like, we're investigating. The core ask here and the root of the question that's coming in from all these people is what's going on and how do we fix it? They want the same thing. They want to protect the reputation of the company. So all of these things and these answers to their questions, that's the root that they're trying to get to. If you say we're investigating, you've said the wrong answer. Customers, we got a weird email. Is something going on? News outlet, we received a tip you're being ransomed. Sure, why not? Or a regulatory body, we saw a tweet that you've had a data breach. True? We're investigating. Wrong. What's the core ask here? We need information answers now. That's what we're looking for. We need to know how to handle this and manage this ourselves. Externally, though, there's you again. Industry peers, are you hacked? Tell us what happened so we can stop it too. We care about us, but like, you got any IOCs, anything you can share with us? Cyber companies, we're hearing bad things and we're at your service for a fee. And the government, hi, we're hearing something is going on. How can we help? How many of you had a conversation with somebody from the FBI, DHS, or CISA? They have a lot of great tools and stuff, but they want to help. The question is, you may have sat down and said, I legitimately don't know how you could help us. You don't know our environment. What do you have that can help me? But they're coming in saying, we want to help. That's the key function here. You probably answered, we're investigating. But they're saying, how can we help you with this issue? The question is, do you need help? Maybe you don't know. That's okay. In reality, there's you in the middle, and here's all these people. But the problem is, I showed all those arrows always coming into you every time, and it doesn't look like that in reality. It is insane. There's arrows going every which way. Someone contacts a news media outlet who contacts you, who talks to a regulatory body, who talks to an executive, who talks to his buddy that he golfs with, who works at a news media outlet. And it ends up being this spider web of nonsense going all around. And so the problem is, you're no longer the focal point. You're just on the bottom of this stack of a lot of people with a lot of different interests trying to find out how to fix this problem. And what do you probably hit them with? We're investigating? Oh man, wrong answer. Does that look familiar? Same thing, rat's nest for any of you who've ever worked in a DC. That's exactly what that actually looks like in an incident. It is bonkers. I don't know how to put this politely. The problem is that you can't plan for everything that's ever going to happen in a cyber incident. There are so many plays, if you will, that happen, you could never anticipate them. A hilarious story, and I'll leave this company redacted. There was a shred-it truck that had come up to shred a bunch of PII evidence for this company. It was all kinds of banking information, financial information, and the truck jammed up, and they said, cool, our shredder's busted, we're gonna bring in a new shredder truck, and they drove off down the road. The problem was there were still checks and account balances and financial information sitting in the hopper, and as they drove down the road, the exhaust pipe on the top took those pieces of paper up and just literally distributed them down the road. And a good Samaritan called us up and said, hey, I am finding a lot of your financial information lying on the side of this road. It's just a long line of documents blowing around out here. What the hell do you do? Did you plan for that? No, that is the most ridiculous thing you've ever heard of. It's bridging physical and cybersecurity, sure, definitely information protection, but you can't plan for that, and you have to respond accordingly. So we've got to think about what are the priorities then for the business. For you, it's that instant response lifecycle. Tried and true by NIST, it's got everything you need. You've got thoughts and plans and everything else that goes with it. However, your business leader priorities, again, it's that reputation cloud. Ultimately, it's them saying, what's going on and how do we fix it? They're trying to protect the reputation of the company. That makes sense. That's the whole point of being a business. But external entities also have other priorities. Things like we need information answers now, and how can we help you with this issue? All those core things that we talked about. So now we have all of these different things happening as a result of what's going on. So how do we go from this racing point in a few years ago, just absolutely botching this pit stop, to a world record pit stop instead? That's the efficiency. That's unraveling that rat's nest. How do we reduce that and change, ultimately, how we approach incident response? The key here is communicating during a cyber incident. We talked a little bit about this, where everyone is at a disadvantage right from the start of an incident. The first things first, there's different priorities. Everybody has a different view about what they need to do as a result of their job. You have a different priority than those business leaders, than external entities, than even your coworkers. And that puts you in an interesting position to have to figure out how to bridge that gap. The second thing, there's different expertise. You're a cybersecurity practitioner or IT, and you're working in this space, and so you know what you need to do to maybe bring something back online, restore from backups, close ports, whatever it might be. But your CFO has a different expertise, and accounting has a different expertise, and HR has a different expertise, and corporate communications can write way better than you could ever write. So how do we manage all of those pieces? Third, there's different ways of working. Some people are working agile, some people are working waterfall, some people are working ad hoc, some people, whatever other CMMI jargon you want to throw out there, but everybody works different. Some people are in Slack, some people are still sending emails, and somebody in your office is still printing emails and hand delivering them. You know it. But there's different ways of communicating. There's different ways that we talk as humans. This is a big piece of the puzzle when we think about who we are as humans. We have different ways of talking about the same thing. If we gave a brief to all of you right now and asked you to come up and present on it, every single one of you would have a different take, a different way of presenting it, and a different way of communicating that issue. That is the biggest burden when it comes to cybersecurity incidents. It's not actually solving the problem, it's figuring out how to speak the same language. Everybody has different jargon. CFO's up there talking about EBITDA or stocks or whatever else. You're down here talking about vulnerabilities. None of that makes sense to the other person. So where do we go? Do we go closer to business leaders to be able to meet them in running the business? Do they need to come to us? I think it's somewhere in the middle. When we think about something like data breaches, and let's talk about this a little bit. This was a study that we did late last year, and what we did was we took a little bit of what the industry is reporting. So in this case, taking the Verizon DBIR, and looked at what breaches are actually happening. And so you can see it's things like social engineering, basic web application attacks, system intrusion, miscellaneous errors, privilege misuse, lost and stolen assets. What does that mean to a CEO? Nothing. What's a social engineering? What's a misuse? What's a backdoor? I have 5 on my Lambo or whatever they're driving these days. It makes no sense to them. The thing, though, with the DBIR is that you can see it's pretty well spread out between things like social engineering, basic web application attacks, and system intrusion. That makes sense, right? That jives roughly with what we know about attack vectors today. And I know there's a new DBIR out. I'll update this data eventually here. What gets tricky then is what are people talking about in academia? So we go to something like site.ai, and we start to search on some different fields, things like social engineering and basic web application attacks. And no surprise, we're talking more from an academic standpoint about system intrusion, the cool stuff of cybersecurity. Nobody wants to write about social engineering in academia. But here's a problem. What is your CEO seeing every morning when he turns on the news, the New York Times, or opens up the sweet light pink pages of the Financial Times? He's seeing the cool stuff because it's cool. He's not hearing about the #1 attack vector, social engineering. That's barely down there in the New York Times and the Guardian. Some of those other categories aren't even up there. No one's talking about denial of service in the news, which is bonkers. So from that standpoint already, you're behind. You're not talking about the same level of interest in these individual categories. Even worse, someone then goes to Google and it turns out they're only looking up the cool stuff. They're not looking up the stuff that's actually impacting the business. Do you even see basic web application attacks on there? And we just talked about that being the #1 problem. So that is a huge problem right from the start. If you have never talked to your CEO, CFO, or any of your other leadership, you're already behind. That's a huge problem. So again, how do we bridge that gap? We got to communicate for success. First things first, what is impacted? We're having this cyber incident, and what is the problem? Is it email? Is it a product? Is it an app? Is it something else, wireless, whatever it might be? Tell them what is impacted. The key, though, in telling them is you're probably thinking about IT impacts, about the specific system, app, database, server. They don't care. What they care about is that business process. We talked about that earlier, how business process is tied directly to IT. You buy IT to support business processes. Shout this from the rafters to everybody who's in your leadership. If you don't know all of the business processes that a system and app supports, if you guys have Salesforce and you don't know how you are using Salesforce, you better find out. Because now if Salesforce goes down, you can't communicate what's broken. Is it just your sales cycle, or is it the website, or all of your inbound marketing, or this conference that you're having right now? You have to be able to understand how that maps out. If you don't, the best day to start is today. The second thing, how long is this going to last? This is a tough one. I don't know, right? Maybe I could pull together some information. It's a cloud backup. It depends on how many people are on the VPN, and the concentrator went down last week from a patch, and I don't know. It could be a day, it could be 50 days. That's fine, but I don't know isn't an acceptable answer to an executive. We talked about all the hats that they're wearing earlier. Those business leaders have things they need to do, people they need to communicate, their jobs that they need to do. So if you're unsure, give a range. It is okay, but you're the expert. You're probably the person who can best approximate what that time range looks like. You could say it could be anywhere from an hour to 7 days. That's a big difference, but at least from an executive standpoint, now they have something to work on. If there's a sales cycle or a shareholder meeting coming up or something else, they can plan and do their job appropriately. The biggest thing at the end of the day is that reasonable estimate is a huge help to them. Again, you're probably the best person in the company to give that estimate, so you as an expert need to be prepared to do so. Where do you need help? Do you need money, time, people? One of the big things is ultimately is for you to be able to communicate from that help standpoint and say, hey, what do we need help with? And more importantly, what might be something that has a broader impact on the business? For example, your email server gets locked up, and you say, if we could just shut down all email because it's literally just crawling right now, it's not really working, it's in and out and intermittent. If we could shut it down for the whole company for 30 minutes, we can restore from backup. That's a conversation that a business leader can understand and say, yeah, I'm on board for that. Shut that shit down. Communicate for success. Are your answers actionable? Don't give somebody wishy-washy answers. Give them something that you know concretely. Don't overstate it, but find a way to give something that they can work with. You need to keep the business moving. Again, I think one of the most interesting aspects of being in cybersecurity is that you probably know more about some people at your company's jobs than they do. I constantly am coming in after HR and going, why don't you have an individual employee number, an individual department number, so I can track this and pivot on it and put it in my SIM? It kills me, and I'm over there trying to tell them how to do their job, right? But they do so much more than that. And sometimes we come after them thinking we could do their jobs, but you probably are not the right person to be sitting down and having a tough conversation with somebody. You need to respect that. And ultimately, that means that you need to give directions to people so they can keep doing their jobs. Is email down? Is Salesforce down? What is our backup plan to keep things moving? Your #1 goal is reducing the impact to business. That is cybersecurity, not logs, not app security, not vulnerabilities. That is what you're doing. That's the main top-level thing. And you've got to be able to communicate that to business leaders about what that means. Are you managing expectations? There are a lot of decisions and actions that are going to be taken by others as a result. So going back to what I just said, you need to be able to give them the best information so they can be the best at their jobs. It's okay if that information changes. You ultimately want to make sure that you keep giving them that information in real time and keep them up to date. Another thing to think about, who's remote working or out sick? We used to joke about this during contingency planning exercises about like large flu plagues and lots of people being out at once. And everyone's like, oh, sure, that would definitely happen. And then COVID hit. Suddenly that became very real. And so that's something we have to think about is if I normally talk to this person or this executive who I like and they're not here today because they're working remote or we're a totally remote company, or they're out sick, or their kids are sick, or something else is happening. Who else can I talk to? You need to have a list. It's not just one person or a small group of people, it's a bunch of people. Constantly communicate. This is the biggest one. Whatever is going on, and you know as a cybersecurity incident happens, it continues to grow and change and evolve, and you learn more information. That cycle in the middle that we were talking about, it goes around and around and around. You have to stay in constant contact. If that 1 hour to 7 days estimate turns into 6 hours to 7 days, you've got to tell somebody. If it turns into 6 hours to 24 hours, tell somebody. Let them know what's going on. Those regular touch points will make a huge difference. So after all of that, you made it out of live. You guys had kind of an ad hoc process, and you've made it through, which is stupendous. So what do? Flex seal, boom, we're done here, right? Move on, let's get back to business. We got things going on. Yeah, you've been there, you've been part of this. Something went wrong, let's just throw some money at it, let's bring in a vendor to talk about it. We're gonna implement some DAS tool and call it a day, and it's never gonna happen again. Instead, let's think back to that life cycle, preparation. Let's prepare for the not unexpected, it's expected, right? It's not when an incident will happen, but or not if an incident will happen, but when it will happen. Let's talk about contingency planning. When we think about contingency planning or the CP family in NIST or whatever, you're thinking about cybersecurity, but it's so much bigger than just you. It's about focusing on business processes. How do we keep the company moving? That's what we were talking about earlier. So it's not just about IT systems and apps, it's about even other things like alternate work sites, backup laptops. How many of you know that your company has a whole storage bin full of laptops in a warehouse somewhere that they could go pull from? And how many of you have to go dig those suckers out and apply patches on a monthly basis because they're not online? That's contingency planning, and that could make a difference for your company. So that's an IT piece. But for everyone who needs that laptop, the HR person, the finance person, the facilities person, that's invaluable. The second thing, disaster recovery exercises. It's not just the after incident exercise that's the key. No more tabletop exercises. Everybody is talking about this. We're done with tabletop disaster recovery exercises. You need to actually fail over. You need to move to a different availability zone. You need to fail over to a different region in the cloud. You can't just say it works or say the backup works until you've actually done it. And you'd be surprised. When you do it, it suddenly doesn't work, and you go, man, I'm glad we did this, because if things had gone wrong, that would have been a huge problem. You need to actually run those real tests to make sure that what you're thinking will happen will actually happen. Your incident response drills. This is a key piece of this puzzle. You've got to be able to find a way to respond. And when we talked about that initial flow through from the NIST side, that's great. That's a lot of individual steps. Going through the motions helps you. When we talk about that panic response, you've got to be able to suppress that panic response, especially as an incident responder or someone who's in a role doing incident response. If you're part of the equation, even as just a database administrator, but you're going to be helping with its incident response, you've got to stay cool, calm, and collected. That's a huge piece of the puzzle. The biggest thing about incident response drills is, while one, talking through some of these ridiculous scenarios, like those checks being distributed down the road, they're helpful, they're great thought exercises, and it can help you in the long run. It's not about how to respond. You could never, ever, ever playbook for that shredding check incident. You might take it back and say, hey, I heard Alex talk about this ridiculous thing at this presentation. How would we handle that? That's a good one. I used to love to pull from movies, right? Ridiculous scenarios, but at the root, there's always something that you can say, all right, if Godzilla shows up, what is the root of the problem? Well, it's going to be that our office is destroyed. So the root is, how do we move to a new office and get set up and running again? All of that is helpful, but the biggest thing, it is about building relationships. We talked about building that bridge back to business leaders. It is about you meeting people. It is about finding a common way to talk about the problem, and it's about becoming friends with those people. You are part of this equation and part of the larger business. If you're now saying, I would love more money, now you have a face. And more importantly, there's a reason behind that. That's that post-incident activity. We're telling business leaders why we need more resources, and now they've seen it, right? That's a huge piece of the puzzle. They've experienced it firsthand. I'm not telling you to catch them while they're off guard, but I'm telling you to catch them while they're off guard. While it's fresh in their minds, take advantage of that, right? Come up and document all the information that you talked about during that incident and that post-incident. Most importantly, this is the key phrase that will resonate with every single executive that you talk to reduce the risk of this happening again, ... Say whatever it is you want to say. That is worth a lot of money. right? Money, time, resources, people, that is what keeps a business ticking. And so to say to reduce the risk of this happening again can make a huge difference. Cyber incidents ultimately have a demonstrable impact on the business. So you want to make your case, right? How can you prevent it from happening again? What are some things we could do? What are some things we could do better? But also telling the business if there is nothing you could have done. That is an acceptable answer. To say we could not have stopped Shred-it, one of our third-party companies, from distributing checks all down the road. What are we supposed to do about that? Nothing. But having a plan in place to respond to it when it does happen again, that reduces the risk. Having a team mobilized or understanding that, hey, let's just have maybe some garbage bags down at the security desk so everybody can run out and start grabbing those things off the road, that can make a huge difference. That becomes part of a drill, a contingency plan. All of that feeds back into that cycle. Document all of that in a lessons learned after action report. Executives love things that are written down. I don't know why. Maybe they like to read. Maybe they're just taking it while they're jaunting around to the Caribbean on their private jets. I don't know what they're doing. But most importantly, you want to write it down and say, hey, this is what happened. That's great because now they have something that's actionable. They can take it to the board. They can take it to their other business leaders. But it is a CYA for your ass to put it down on paper. Now you've at least warned them and said, here is the risk. And hopefully that turns into money, becomes an artifact that ends up in the budget next year to get a new tool, to get more headcount, to get more whatever. But ultimately, if it doesn't turn anything, at least you wrote it down and you said, hey, this was the problem, and we tried to fix it. At the end of the day, we're all the same. Hello, I like money. Executives, we want money for our budgets. Executives want it for their stuff. That's fine. But that brings us a lot closer together than maybe you're giving all of us credit for. So how can we get more resources? Well, let's look at cybersecurity risk ratings. When we talked about reducing the risk earlier, when we think about risk, we do likelihood and impact, and it feeds down into probability and impact, and we multiply it out, and it's probability and impact equals risk, and this heat map from hell, and that's how we talk about it. Blech. All of that comes together, and we say, cool, great, yeah, we've got some impact, I got a high risk. What does that mean to an executive? Nothing. What does that mean to Mr. Krabs? Hello, I like money. That's what resonates. We're talking about running a business. The business's job is to provide a service, which generally charges money for that service. If you're talking about this, that doesn't resonate with executives. So you got to find a common ground that works for them. I'm not talking about your dad's cybersecurity risk assessments anymore. CFOs and finances have been focused on managing money to include earning and not losing it for decades. Cybersecurity is a new profession, shocker. CFOs and accountants have been around for a long, long time. They may be frustrating and annoying for you, but they are very good at what they do. Risk management is a newer role in most companies, but it's broad, right? When we think about looking at 10K reports for publicly traded companies, there's usually risks documented in there. Business risk, competitor risk, COVID-19 risk, and in some cases, cybersecurity. Risk management, though, is a broader function than just cybersecurity risk management. You need to remember that. That risk management function is probably who's running those disaster recovery and contingency planning exercises. It's part of the broader scope of reducing risk for the company. So they're using things like probabilities. So it's not just IT. Finally, we have contingency planners, like we talked about, focus on reducing downtime and business interruptions. Again, it's not just about IT. If our office gets struck by Godzilla, how do we get the office back up and running again? Or where do we go to work? Ultimately, you've got to speak your business leader's language. And that's where there's this new concept called quantitative risk that's coming out. This is a big help. Ultimately, we think about things like loss magnitude. How bad could this be? How much money could we lose as a result of somebody getting into this database? How much money is that worth? That is quantifiable, right? There's enough data in there. If you're looking for metrics, go pull up the fines for GDPR, CCPA. They will tell you how screwed you will be if that database goes public. That's a number. You can tell somebody about that. And if that database isn't protected, you can say, hey, right now I'm guessing it's probably somewhere between $5,000 and $5 million, but probably about $100,000 we would get popped with if things went wrong. And we don't have any encryption on it. Now you can probably get a tool to get that encrypted. One of the big things you can say is how frequently could that happen? Again, you guys are experts. You have the best guess. One in every 5 years, once every 10 years, once every 100 years. There's data out there about how often breaches are happening. The Verizon DBR is a good report, but there's lots of other data that's starting to be collected from the industry at large. That starts to fit into this equation as well. We can then look at things like how to control it. And so we say, how much would we need to invest to fix this problem? Looking at things, again, like the loss magnitude and loss event frequency from both of those, and we can pull together and say, hey, we've got all the information we need about how much this control would most likely cost us. The hard part is if there's a whole process to move through, if we don't know how many people we need or how long it's going to take us, it could be a range. But if somebody shows up and says, I'm a cybersecurity vendor, and it's going to cost you $5 million a year, your lower bound, your most likely, and your upper bound are all $5 million because you know the cost. So that makes it easier. The question then becomes for that second part, like I was talking about, how much does that actually reduce our risk? Does it solve the problem? Does it change the math from earlier about how frequent it might happen? And more importantly, how much it might cost us? You put all that together, and you end up with these graphs. These, if any of you are financial savvy, look exactly like stock market ticker symbols or financial distribution curves. Your CFO would recognize this immediately. That's a huge advantage for you as a cybersecurity practitioner. You're now taking your gut instinct, which is good, and you're actually putting numbers to that data. Again, you're the expert. You have the best amount of data to pull this together. But if you come in and you say, if we have no security controls, here's our risk range, and if we're able to implement some controls or more controls and reduce the risk by that amount, they go, cool, I need to invest $0 for the top one, and I'm totally pwned. I can invest $5 million for the second one, or I can invest $500 million and get the third one. I can now make an educated decision as a business leader about my risk tolerance. Do I have zero risk tolerance and I need to invest that $50 million? Or can I call it a day at $5 million and go, you know what, firewall and MFA and a good patching program is all I need, because that gets me pretty close to that third one. That is a different conversation. Now you're talking about dollars and figures and quantitative amounts, not just heat maps. In case you didn't know, as we were talking along there was different quotes through the bottom of there. If you were trying to keep track of where they came from, there is all your answers as well. Again, I am Alex Nette from Hive Systems. It's been a pleasure to talk to you guys. Sorry about the delay with the fire drill. Thank you very much. Any questions before I go about any of that? Easy. Thank you all.